in the wet. Who's that? Punk, it's just some kid. Good for nothing, no good. Forget him. It's not worth Nah, you got it all wrong. That's some kid. 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 I see you. That's some kid. 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 That's some kid.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Some Kid. Today we're going to be going over principle number 2, which is community. We just finished up our first principle, which is connection, connecting with students. And now we're going to be talking about how to build a broader community of students in your classrooms. So for this particular section, we're going to be looking at, let's go over a summary of chapters 3 and 4. In chapter 4, Wilbur is now in a new community. He's out in the barn. He's surrounded by other animals, and he's just incredibly lonely. On page 27, it says, Wilbur didn't want food. He wanted love. This is at the bottom. He wanted a friend, someone who would play with him. And I think even the title of this chapter, Loneliness, it's weird, but a lot of students can come, you can be just like us adults, but you can come into a classroom and you can be surrounded by other people, but you can still feel lonely within that classroom. And so that's really where I want us to make this Charlotte's Web connection is, once again, not to dehumanize our students. This is obviously a metaphor, but we're seeing our students as Wilbur in this case. And we're saying Wilbur's here and he's surrounded by barnyard animals, but he's not one of them. He tries to connect with the goats and the lamb and everybody. And they're just like, leave me alone, little pig. And he's just depressed the entire loneliness chapter until he hears a voice in the rafters. He doesn't know who that voice is. We learn who that is in chapter 5, which is titled Charlotte. And that is where he's first introduced to Charlotte, but it also becomes very clear that Charlotte is different than he is. So he has kind of a repulsed response to when he sees Charlotte, when he sees her capture the fly. She talks about drinking blood. It grosses him out. But we see them start to build this relationship. And Charlotte, out of all the animals in the barnyard, she is engaging with him. And then by engaging with him, we see something really interesting happen, which is that when the other barnyard animals try to pick on him, Charlotte is now introduced as just a clear friend figure in that environment. And so when they try to pick on him, Charlotte steps in and is like, nope, this pig is my friend. And because he's my friend, and I'm smarter than all of you, you're going to treat him with respect. Yeah. And we see that not just now, but it starts throughout the rest of the book. And then as we move into our third chapter, our 6th chapter, which is Summer Days, we start to see, we're introduced to other characters like Templeton, and we see just Charlotte once again stepping in and kind of protecting him. In our case, with our study that we're going over, we're now going to be transferring the figure that we look at from Fern, which is who we talked about in chapters 1 through 3, to viewing us teachers as Charlotte. How can we be a champion for our students, which Charlotte is from this point on, all the way through the rest of the book. And obviously, we don't want to follow this metaphor all the way through. Charlotte refers to herself, and Wilbur refers to herself as a friend, right? So Charlotte is his friend. We all know as teachers, we're not supposed to be our students' friends. And we'll get into the conversation about that in a little bit. But really what this is about she is responsible for creating that community for Wilbur. Wilbur is on his own, he's lonely, and then Charlotte. I mean, it couldn't be any more clear than the chapter titles. Loneliness and Charlotte. And that's what being a Some Kid teacher is all about. It's about your students coming in wherever they are, whatever they need, and then Charlotte. Like you are that Charlotte for that student. You are that connection point, that student who doesn't want to talk in class, that student who feels lonely, that student who feels disconnected. You are that person who's kind of like pulling them in, but then also protecting them from the students who, are going to get in the way.
And you give value to that student.
Yeah.
When you give value to that student as a teacher, that gives value to that student in the eyes of the other students in the community. And at this point, the community is your classroom.
Yeah.
So you're saying we're our own little community in here, and everyone in here has value. And you show that as a teacher by valuing each individual student.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And especially those students who seem on the outside. You find a way to make a connection with that student and bring them in.
Yeah. And it's funny because you could have students who are completely opposites of one another. They are outside of your classroom. They're in different cliques. They may not even there are some students who won't even look or talk to other students. Hopefully they do, because we want to instill that in them. But when they enter into your space, you see such interesting, talk about creativity. You see such interesting connections happening because those students wouldn't ordinarily interact with each other, but because they have to, you start to see just these such interesting connections. And I don't know about you, but I've seen the most interesting friendships form in my classes because I'm seating one student next to another student who are completely different, but they don't have anything else to do except for to just sit next to each other. And you've created that community of respect. So then they have to respect each other. They have to coexist. So then they start sitting there and they start talking, and slowly but surely they start creating those connection points. And the funniest moments to me are when students enter my class, they either didn't know each other or they didn't want to know each other. And then they leave your class being friends or best of friends in some cases.
Exactly.
But that's the power of creating that community and creating a space where cliques aren't allowed to happen. And you want those natural organic relationships. You don't want to completely shut down friendships that already exist, because that's an important part of community as well. You've got the other barnyard animals. They all know each other. It's really that introduction of bringing Wilvers into the fold of the classroom. And so the other students are like, oh, okay. I can accept that person. I can talk to that person. I can try to understand that person.
And as a teacher, you can orchestrate that somewhat.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want it all to be orchestrated, but let's say you're giving a group assignment and you have a few artists in there. You make sure that they're split up and in different groups so that when there comes a part to the project where they need somebody who can illustrate or who can do something a little different, they are going to be called on by the other students, are going to be valued by the other students because of their ability.
Yeah. And you can't really understate the importance of value and bestowing that value on students in the classroom, because value is essentially power. So when you're giving them that role within a group, when you're giving them that power and saying, hey, you're an important part of what we're creating in this space, then they'd want to exercise that power. In some cases, they want to keep exercising that power and keep exercising that power. Or, the best thing is when, and we'll talk about this when it comes to identity, but when students are so well known in the classroom that an art project comes up and a kid across the class is like, hey, you need to talk to Philip because Philip he's a class artist.
Mm-hmm.
And then, what that does for Philip then is just it takes that part of him that he's been hiding, and then it just allows him to bring that out and say, hey, this is who I am. It's what I'm good at. It's what I can contribute. And that's part of being a human being. So as you're going through this with other teachers or other parents, try to create a bridge from what we talked about in session 1, which was connection, to community. How can you go from that teacher-student connection to creating connections using your power, using your influence to add value to that student and thereby connect them to the rest of the community, just like they did with Wilbur? There is one thing I forgot about that I do want to touch on, and that is that in your classroom, how did you deal with the Templetons? Because there's Templetons, and again, what I'm not saying is there's little rats in every classroom. That's not the same.
No,
But you know what I'm saying, though. How do you deal with those students that are just kind of like they're on the edges? That they, but we know from the book and we know from experience, the Templetons have a role to play in the community. So how do you deal with the Templeton?
Well, first you have to know the Templeton, because Charlotte did that in the book. She's like, well, he likes this. This is a way I can capture him and draw him in and get him to be a part. Maybe it's a sinister reason he wants to be a part.
Yeah.
But I can still draw him in. I can recognize his personality and what's important to him.
Yeah.
recognize what is important to Templeton, and then figure out a way that he can be valued.
Yeah. Because the reality, as much as we don't want to admit it, is that in this book, Templeton, his character, he's a static character. His character doesn't change.
Right.
Even in the end, which we're not getting to right now, even in the end, Templeton is just like, I'm Templeton. What's my motivation? It's to get food.
All about me.
Yeah, all about me. And you're going to have students like that. Like, you want to change their heart. You want to take their hardened hearts and you want to soften them. And we see that with Templeton. There's times he can be convinced and his heart can be softened. But that doesn't mean that Templetons are excluded from the community.
No.
It doesn't mean you go, oh, that Templeton. Now, you don't trust him around your goose eggs, right?
Exactly.
But you can still find ways in which he's part of the community. And we'll see in some later chapters, like how Templeton kind of over and over again, the Templeton saves the day. And I can't tell you the number of times in my classroom when I had Templetons, these students at the beginning of the year are like, oh man, how am I going to deal with this particular student? And then that student becomes so integral to how the classroom works that at the end of the year, you're like, I can't believe I'm saying this, but we could not have pulled this off without
them.
Yeah. And so, and that's what you got to dig into with your group. And again, we're not trying to just, I don't want you to call your students rats. I don't want you to call your students pigs. Hopefully you understand the literary value of metaphor, but try to say to yourself, okay, like, here's my Wilbur. If I'm putting myself as Charlotte, then are there Templetons in our story? And have I been pushing that Templeton out of my classroom? Have I been trying to get Templeton out? When really I desperately need Templeton to be in. And then in what ways can Charlotte in the book and all the other characters of the book, what can they teach us about bringing those Templetons in? And that's so important. So find your Templeton.
Yes, exactly. And find what motivates Templeton.
Yes.
Because Templeton's motivated by something, just like every other student in your classroom.
Yep, exactly.